Over the last 20 years, a topic that has remained in the discussions of foreign affairs experts and journalists is the dynamic between the US and China. There's then another relationship existing between China and the Western world, which is also significant but less talked about, the one with the European Union. The 27 member states of the EU all have bilateral relations with China, some more friendly, some less, but they also engage with Beijing collectively as a union for the common policies and frameworks. And this relationship, very important for the entire world, has been changing. So in today's video we'll discuss the relationship between the EU and China, how it has evolved recently and the possible implications for the future. We'll talk mainly about trade, but also about human rights and geopolitical issues. I am Mirko Paradiso from Euractiv. Let's dive in. The EU and China are quite different places. While the EU is, for the most part, a union of democratic countries based on market economy, China defines itself as a socialist country. China's economy today operates under a mixed system, where private companies and state-owned enterprises coexist, albeit under the significant influence of the Chinese Communist Party, which has greatly affected the dynamic between the two parts. After joining the World Trade Organization in 2001 and becoming a major global manufacturing and economic superpower, the volume of trade with the EU increased exponentially. However, the increase in the volume of trade and economic growth in China did not lead the country towards a more democratic model, as some American and European political scientists theorized during the 90s with the theory of modernization. On the other hand, with the arrival of Xi Jinping as secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, and after becoming president of China in 2013, a richer and more powerful China became more assertive and started challenging the existing global order. Over the last few years, the EU and China have been increasing their ties in trade, while exchanging more vocal criticism and adopting sometimes more restrictive policies. Concerns over the new geopolitical activity of Beijing, the Belt and Road Initiative, and Hong Kong and Taiwan, human rights violations, including the many against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, as well as the arrival of Donald Trump and its anti-Chinese stances, began to tense the relationship between the EU and China. In 2019, for the very first time, the EU referred to China as a partner and systemic rival, and as an actor that promoted alternative models of governance, challenging the European values and interests. The shift of power continued then after the COVID pandemic, and as a consequence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when EU leaders started mentioning more often the concept of strategic autonomy and de-risking.
The European way of dealing with China in the past few years has kind of summarized in the view of strategic autonomy. In a very important speech that President von der Leyen from the European Commission did in China, she talked instead of the concept of de-risking. The concept of de-risking is one in which it says, look, we don't only care about how much we sell, we also care about whether we can continue to sell. We care about our business continuity. We need to make sure that we can continue to produce, even if there are things happening in the world that actually prevent us from doing so. That means bringing some of the production back to Europe. That means caring about the robustness, the resilience of our economy, and therefore we optimize our production capacity in different ways. That's the concept of de-risking, and it is a concept that is not relevant just for the EU, it's also relevant for China, and I think that the Chinese partners are also thinking, how can we make sure that we can continue to produce irrespective of what goes on globally.
When the President of the European Commission mentions de-risking, she refers to an attempt of minimizing dependency for crucial resources and technologies for the EU to ensure its economic security, while becoming strategically autonomous by achieving self-sufficiency and resilience in the global arena. In the light of this political shift, trade also came under more rigorous scrutiny. China, despite being a member of the World Trade Organization, has been accused of not adhering to the rules of global trade. The Chinese government has been accused of meddling on the economy several times, favoring Chinese companies and damaging international competitors. Examples of this are the accusations made by the EU and the US towards China of subsidizing its companies manufacturing steel and aluminium, to which they responded by considering introducing tariffs over the imports of these in order to protect European and American products. The same allegations has been made against Chinese companies producing electric cars, heavily subsidized by the government to gain an unfair advantage over other companies. The Chinese government has naturally rejected such allegations, accusing the EU and the US of being protectionist, but the tension has also been on the rise on other fronts. Many EU countries, including Germany, have been re-evaluating their use of Huawei and ZTE 5G equipment in their telecoms network over security concerns. Lithuania took a strong stance against China in 2021 over the issue of Taiwan and is currently facing backlash. Ultimately, the alliance between Russia and China has strained the relationship even further, and many EU countries have been reconsidering their bilateral relation with the country. The highly controversial participation of Italy on the Belt and Road Initiative has been recently withdrawn from the government of Giorgia Meloni. Even if the two parts are still major trading partners, it's clear that the relationship worsened, and the fear of a trade war between the USA and EU and China has been on the rise. But is that something likely to happen?
We need to continue to do business with China, but we need to resolve some of our grievances. The US launched the Inflation Reduction Act, which had many purposes, but one of the purposes was to try and prevent at least the increase of economic ties with China. As in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was also something that grieved the EU, and the EU retaliated to the US with its own way of try and produce proportional measures. When it comes to China, the EU will start an anti-dumping investigation on the electric vehicles to try and identify whether this great increase in production of electric vehicles in China is done on legal terms, and by legal terms we mean on the level playing field, or is actually financing its firms and therefore giving its firms an unfair advantage. This is a very new thing. The Chinese authorities have already reacted. We mustn't preempt the result of this. So in that respect, I wouldn't say that there is a trade war, but it's important to give a signal to China, just as we did to the US, that we will look after our own interests. And by the way, we need to do it on a set of rules that are agreed globally. And this is really the problem. What are those global set of rules that we operate in? Because they are shifting, and it's not necessarily the case that we all agree on what they are.
China is too big an actor to be ignored in the world arena, so building good relations with it while being able to draw red lines and upholding environmental standards, human rights and ensuring a level playing field is one of the EU's most pressing challenges right now. This has also proven to be difficult for other countries like the US, Japan and many more. So what would be an ideal situation? How can the EU de-risk their relationship with China while improving political and commercial relations and multilateral cooperation without giving up on basic values? It might seem impossible, but there might be some solutions.
The US had always had, after the Second World War, had this global supremacy in terms of leadership, and therefore it has the most to lose as a result of China attempting to take over. Now, we don't know that China will take over, but we do know that China needs to find a new place in the global world order, very much because of the fact that it is a big country and it is increasingly becoming richer. The EU has always been in the middle. It doesn't want to challenge anybody. It never really had a leadership role at the global level, but it has a very important role in terms of identifying the rules of engagement. And I think it's absolutely essential that everybody, and that includes the EU, tries to maintain at the very least peace and then find a minimum denominator on which we can all agree and therefore continue to promote international engagement, international trade, international economic relations, which are an incredible enabler of putting people out of poverty and promoting welfare in all our countries. But it's crucial that we find those rules, agree on them, and then agree to enforce them.
The relationship between the EU and China is an important one and will be a determinant factor for this part of the 21st century. A deteriorating relationship would be bad news for both Chinese and Europeans, while maintaining one that doesn't uphold values such as human rights or fair competition would be detrimental as well. This was the first video of a series in which we deepen the relationship between the EU and the major actors of the world right now. Stick to our website to find out more about the China-EU relations and consider subscribing if you enjoy this kind of content.